Hey everyone, it's Mangino. Welcome to the Mangino Talks podcast. We talk about everything that matters to Pittsburgh, from current events to Pittsburgh history, social issues to sports, politics to practical day-to-day life. And it doesn't get a whole lot more practical than the topic we're discussing today, and it's debt. An amazing story in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Pittsburgh credit card debt has grown with higher rates and inflation. We are looking at credit card debt, according to this report, that is about to push $1 trillion across the country. Just an absolutely amazing number. We're sitting at $986 billion in the first quarter. It's now expected that the American people, according to Wallet Hub, will add an additional $150 billion to their credit card debt. Normally what happens is we go through a spending spree going into the last quarter of a year, Christmas and all, right? And then January comes around and then we think, whoa, hold on a second. We got to get ourselves under control. That's not been happening. People have been spending ever increasing amounts of money. And on top of that, the Fed has been increasing interest rates to the tune to where the current credit card rate on average when it comes to interest that people pay is north of now 20%. A remarkable number. And it really is. North of 20%. In Pittsburgh alone, according to this story, credit card debt is up to over $11,000. Up, $1,800 in just 1 year. Now, some people look at this and say, well, compared to other cities around the country, Pittsburgh's not doing all that bad. Now, let's look at these other cities. Santa Clarita in California, they had their credit card debt increase almost $5,000 year over year. Average household credit card debt in California, $19,700. In New York, up to $18,753. Can you imagine having that much credit card debt? But once again, here in Pittsburgh, it's $11,000, up $1,800. And people are saying, well, we have our act together here. In fact, one comment said that when you look at Pittsburgh in comparison, Pittsburgh ranked in the bottom half among the cities with the lowest increases in credit card debt, according to Jill Gonzalez, a Wallet Hub analyst. And she went on to say the low increase is a good indication that Pittsburgh residents are in control of their finances in terms of accumulating more debt. Are we really? If we have more debt this year than we did the year before? Are we really? One person commented on a Facebook post that I had up about this, that people have had credit card debt going up throughout COVID-19, which is not true. In 2020, credit card debt actually went down. People didn't have the opportunity to go and spend like they were spending, and there were greater amounts of dollars coming into people, and so the thought was, let's go ahead and pay off some of this credit card debt. Pretty responsible. And then as things began to open up, people decided they wanted to go shopping, they wanted to have experiences, and the credit card debt began to rise. And then along with that credit card debt that was rising, people's willingness to go spend money, you had this great outpouring of demand fueled by credit card debt that made it to where inflation then began to rise. And for those that don't know, if you have more money chasing goods than you had before, then it's going to then cost more for those goods. As simple as that. And then you have supply chain issues on top of that. Next thing you know, you have inflation. Legitimately. Not to mention the number of companies out there that were looking for opportunities to pad their own bottom line and said, well, supply chain issues, inflation being what it is, we had to raise our prices too, even though they weren't directly impacted. It's true. Happened quite a bit. But now we're at $11,000 in credit card debt. How did we get here? Some people say it is the Fed. Well, they raised interest rates, and as a result of raising those interest rates, then people were having a more difficult time paying the minimum monthly toward their credit card bill, which is a really sad commentary in the first place, that somehow people look at their credit card and say, well, as long as I make the minimum monthly payment, I'm okay. That's insanity. You're never going to pay off that credit card bill if all you do is pay the minimum monthly. And now, according to experts, people are having a difficult time even making the minimum monthly payment. Nuts. And then other people say, well, it's about inflation. When you look at the inflation on all things, then people have just been strapped for cash, and so they've gone to their credit card in order to afford the expenses that just a year or two earlier they were able to afford without using the credit card. And that may very well be the case. But if you have to tap into your credit card in order to afford what you're doing, at what point do you begin to reevaluate what you're doing? Whatever it is. Well, Mangino, I get told, these are expenses that people have, and they just can't get away from these expenses. Well, I have news for people. You're eventually going to have to get away from those expenses. Why? Because you're eventually going to hit the limit on your credit cards. People are eventually going to hit the limit on their home equity loans. And then what do you do? In this report, they talk about the number of people who have been seeking credit counseling. And the credit counselors, they don't see this primarily as an issue of inflation or the Fed. Some people saying, well, you know, this is about Biden. Biden's encouraging all of this extra spending because he keeps on talking about forgiving all of this student loan debt. And then people feel wealthy as a result of that, and then they're spending money they don't even have yet. And I am sure that there are people who are doing that. I know people who do that very thing. They're expecting money in the coming months, and they've already spent the money in anticipation of that money coming, not even waiting for it to show up, not even waiting. And then you have other people when it comes to expenditures that they just spend because they want to. They just feel the overwhelming desire to. They don't need to. They willfully choose to put themselves in horrible financial situations. I know one individual that is sitting on a $700 a month car payment. And the reason why it's as high as it is not because the vehicle is just so expensive. It's because they've already rolled over the debt from a previous car into that car. And now their car's 4 years old. They've been paying some toward that. And then they decided recently to go and buy another car. And now they're looking at that same $700 a month payment. So the idea is, well, it's the same amount every month. The debt out 8 years now. Imagine that one. 8 years of paying $700 a month. Upwards of $4,000 or so to pay off a vehicle that maybe has a sticker price of about $28 or $29. Was it necessary? No. In fact, you can easily argue that most of the credit card debt, the overwhelming percentage of the credit card debt that we're sitting on, isn't debt that we had to go and get into because of unforeseen expenses. Let's be honest. We're sitting on $11,000 on average for a household in credit card debt. How much of that $11,000 do you think, on average, is because people had expenses that came up that they just had to address? The car broke down. I don't know, there was a leak in the roof or something. They had to use their credit card to take care of it. We're fooling ourselves if we think that way. And you know what? The credit counselors, they agree with me. Let me give you an example. The program requires clients to close their credit cards. So if you want to get into debt management, one of the things you have to do is just close your credit cards. You're going to pay back 100% of the principal that you've borrowed. You'll get it at a lower interest rate than the 20+% that's being charged right now. What is it? 22.37 according to Wallet Hub on average. But you're going to pay it all back. But in order to get in the program, you have to cut up the credit cards. What does that mean? That immediately at that point, you have to spend less every month. The spending less that people think they cannot do, now they are compelled to do. And this entire system of credit counseling and credit card debt repayment is all about living within our means. 100%. It says here they're forced to make changes in how they spend their money and managing their budgets. Eventually, we get to that point. The same way we expect the federal government to live within its means. We talk about how the American people do, but the reality is that we don't. Miss Murray, that's quoted in this piece, says that it has to be a lifestyle change. This isn't a quick fix, like a home equity loan. This isn't easy. There's some pain attached, but we find that consumers are more successful when they learn not to rely on their credit cards for extra income like they have been. And she's right. That's what it takes. So ultimately, the responsibility is not the Fed, it's not inflation, it's not the companies and their greed. But see, we don't like to face these realities. We'd rather play the victim. It's amazing how in America today, one of the most popular things to do is play the role of the victim, because then it's somebody else's fault. And then we don't have to take personal accountability. We don't have to be responsible. We don't have to step up and say, we are in this situation. I am in this situation because of what I've done. And I'm the one who's responsible for getting me out of this situation. We just don't like to do that. But we ultimately have to. You can't have credit card debt continue to grow like this, household debt to grow like this, and then you have the student loan debt issue. Now, for the past, 3.5 years almost, we've not had individuals having to make their federal payments. Now, fortunately for them, their interest hasn't been accruing either. But I wonder how many of these individuals have been setting aside money every single month that would be equivalent to what their payment was, and then just pretend like it's not there. And then come September, when you have to start making payments, take all that money and pay it toward it. At least let the money sit in an account someplace, earning some interest, and then start making your monthly payments at that point, because some people are still hoping that the Biden student loan forgiveness will come through. If it ultimately does, then you have the thousands of dollars in your pocket. If it doesn't, you have the money already to pay off the student loan debt and get out from underneath that burden. But for those individuals who've decided over the course of the past 3.5 years to spend that student loan payment every month as though it was newfound wealth, and the loan forgiveness does not come through, these people are in for a world of hurt. And I wonder, who's been counseling these people? Have their parents been talking to them about doing the fiscally responsible thing and putting this money aside? Has anybody been giving this kind of advice? Or has the advice been going out and people just not wanting to hear it because it's just too much fun to go spend money now, even money you don't have? A couple of the people on my Facebook page made a comment that when you look at people spending money they don't have, you got to wonder how many of them were Taylor Swift concert goers. How many of them dropped upwards of $3,000-$5,000 a ticket to go? Got a hotel room for $500, $750, $1,000 a night. Dropped anywhere from $250 to $500 on souvenirs, and then food and parking and the whole thing to have that once-in-a-lifetime experience. And they did it on a credit card that they don't have the money for, and they'll be paying for years to come. And then ultimately, whatever deal they thought was so worth it in order to go and have this experience, they're ultimately going to be paying 2, 3, 4, 5 times as much money when they make those minimum monthly payments for the rest of whatever. But at least they had the experience. It's a sad commentary on where we are. It really is. You know, the federal government has its own spending problem, obviously, $32 trillion in debt. And the American people, we have our own. And when it comes to fiscal responsibility, we are a lot of talk. But the reality is we are not a whole lot of action. Thank you for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast. New episodes drop Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. For more on me, the show, and anything you want me to talk about, be sure to visit ManginoTalks.com and send me an email. Follow me on your favorite social media platform by using @ManginoTalks, or you can just Google Mangino Talks. And once you find me, please like, follow, subscribe, and share the pages with your friends and your family. And thank you once again for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast.